recording now. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
Live. Okay.
Okay, great. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about BIP270 payments today. I implemented BIP270 payments as part of this website that I put together. The website is a very simple tool. It's essentially a timestamping tool for documents. The idea with timestamping being that you use the blockchain essentially as an immutable timestamp. So the website essentially calculates a SHA-256 hash of a document, and then that SHA-256 hash is embedded in a transaction, which is then written onto the blockchain for you. I guess I can quickly demonstrate how that works, because I really want to talk about BIP270, but there's a lot of moving parts in BIP270, but I want to show you sort of the way in which the user experience, what it looks like from the user's point of view when they're experiencing this, right? Now, I can't show you because there is an interaction with hand cash on my mobile phone, but I'm going to be sharing a website. So I will probably end up holding up my mobile to the screen, and let's hope that actually ends up working out okay. All right. So you should be seeing my screen now.
Yeah. Yes.
Now, basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to select a document, and I hope that I don't have anything. Okay, I'm just in the download section here. Okay, I'm just going to choose a random document.
Yeah, make sure it's appropriate.
Yeah, I don't have anything.
I don't want to see your private code base or something. Okay, go ahead.
My private code base, is that a euphemism?
Just a private GitHub repo, which contains sophisticated sCrypt code or something. Yeah. Anyway.
All right. So you should be seeing that essentially the moment that I drag and drop the file on screen, it immediately presents me with the QR code. It prompts me to scan. I'm going to open up hand cash on my mobile now. And
I see.
So I've got the scanning hand cash in scanning mode. I might have to turn off my how do I now get back to being able to choose my settings for? I don't think I can now, right? Because I want to, never mind. I wanted to see if I couldn't just quickly turn off this background thing, because it's not.
Oh, the blur zoom?
The blur zoom, right? So I've got the QR scanner now.
Oh, the blur, okay.
And I'm going to just quickly scan it. It's now scanning the QR code.
Okay, we cannot, okay, we see right,
it's just the middle tab of hand cash. It's the scanner feature. I think we know what you're talking about.
Okay, the scanner feature, and now I'm already swiping now to make the payment.
Okay.
You might have heard it go ding ding on my phone, and you've seen the payment basically pop up on the screen there as well, right? So that is the end-to-end flow of how the BIP270 payment work, which is actually a peer-to-peer payment. And I'm going to explain to you in a second how it basically fits together with the back end and everything. So I'm going to stop sharing that screen now. Does anybody have any questions about what I just showed you guys?
Something quick. So you only upload the hash, right? Not the original document. That's it.
No, the document isn't uploaded. The document basically stays on your computer. In the browser, I just basically use the browser API on the client side to generate the SHA-256 hash, to compose, and that hash then basically is sent to the server. And I'll explain why the hash gets sent to the server rather than to hand cache, because you would assume that you might think that the hash is in the QR code, but it is not. BIP270 is crafty that way. Right, so I'm going to share my screen now.
It's also worth noting too that you could upload that document and to the site, and it'll say if it's verified or not. I did this last night, and it was cool.
Okay.
Yeah. So you can basically take the document. It will do the same. It'll do the same process basically, where it just calculates the hash, and then it checks whether or not there is a hash for that on the blockchain already, right? It'll just basically tell you whether or not it's essentially
Stefan, sorry, is that another transaction in itself to verify that, or is it or not? So
no, verification is not a transaction.
Okay, verification is a regular web transaction then. I mean, just a validation. So it's okay.
Yeah, it's just a validation. Essentially, what the verification, because I'm actually keeping all of the transactions, copies of all the transactions. I'm not actually hitting the blockchain, but I am returning to you from my database where I've saved all of these details. I'm returning to you the full transaction details for you to be able to independently verify that where the hash is on the blockchain. There's just an optimization, right? The next iteration of the product will essentially give you the transaction ID and all of the necessary information that you need will be offline and available to you. So the next version, the next iteration I'm actually building a mobile app for this at the moment. And the mobile app is going to center around the idea of managing documents and digital archiving, meaning that I'm pivoting the product essentially from timestamping to digital archiving. And when that happens, the mobile phone becomes a client, an offline client for managing a digital archive. And that means that when the payment from the mobile goes through, you will actually receive the transaction ID. And because the mobile phone can now independently ping the miner API for the information, you would basically be completely decoupled from my API on your mobile phone, because the mobile phone, with all your information and data on it, still secure, will now just basically go and query the miner ID for the transaction ID with that reference and decompose it to check actually whether or not the hash is on chain, right? So I'm doing it that way around.
SPV. Basically.
Yeah, essentially SPV. So that's going to be the next. That's going to be the mobile phone version of the product. It's going to be the next iteration. But for now, in its current incarnation, it is as basically what you said. The hashes go on chain. I've saved the transaction details in my backend because these are actually paid transactions that I'm charging through a business. So invoices need to be kept, and I need to eventually pay taxes on all of these transactions, right? So because I am a merchant in this sense.
So not only the users paying for the money fee for the original, just the hash, but also you probably have an additional output to you.
So that's the interesting thing. There is only one output. There is no additional output. There is one output in the transaction, and the output spins directly to me. So I basically created, if you think about the way that I did it was I basically create a spendable data transaction, which is the op drop, followed by the data, followed by pay to public key hash. And that entire transaction spends to me, to my address, to me as the merchant's address, which means that when I basically spend that money back to myself, I've essentially accepted the payment. So that's the way that I'm doing it. And essentially also just signing over your transaction as the client to signify acceptance of the money on my side as well. So I think that it stitches together all of the required bits from a legal standpoint in the backend in order to complete the proffer of service and the acceptance of payment for that service on my part, right?
Okay. Cool. Yeah. When do you spend it? You don't spend it immediately, right? It's like your UTXO just slide there. You can spend it later.
I can spend it later. Right now, I'm spending it immediately.
Oh, so you have 2 transactions, just for up to 1 document.
Yes.
One pay you and you spend it. Okay.
They send it to me. I broadcast the transaction. And then immediately after I broadcast that transaction, I broadcast the second spending transaction. So 2 transactions, so a chain of 2 transactions immediately go to the miners. And so that is a very good question, actually. And there is a very specific reason. Sorry, I'm just going to stop sharing quickly. There's a specific reason other than But there's a specific reason why I'm doing that. Part of the reason I'm doing this is because it's for security purposes. Essentially, what I am doing, right, is in order for me to be able to spend that transaction, I'm actually managing private keys and addresses on the server, which receive funds, and that's actually sitting in the cloud, right? So my backend is sitting in the cloud. It has private keys on it, which are basically generating the addresses that people will be spending to, and those received funds come to the server. And the last thing that I want is for those private keys on the server to be sitting on UTXOs that are spendable, right? So in the case of a breach, it's going to be minimal impact, even if they manage to. There's very little chance of them getting the keys because it's all encrypted within the cloud infrastructure within my cloud service provider, where you can provide secured keys, inject those into a Docker container, right? So all of that is all encrypted, but still, to minimize the security risk, I'm essentially immediately spending on the transaction so that there isn't really anything to steal on my server anyway. You might get the private keys, but I'll just take down the server, generate a new set of private keys or a new root phrase or a new root key, because I'm actually using BIP32, generate a new master key, and then you basically, you'll have to try and breach me the second time. But even if you get that key, there's nothing in those funds anymore, because I spend the money immediately the moment I get it, and I spend it to an offline wallet. So it's not going to, you're not going to get it.
Okay.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
So why not have two outputs, one sending over to you, and instead of doing chain of transactions? Why not?
It's an excellent question. It was a bit of an accident how it came about, because as I was putting this together, the way that would have to work then, right, is that the transaction that comes back from Handcash. So Handcash here is basically, I'm the merchant, and Handcash is essentially the other part. Handcash mobile phone is basically the customer in this case, right? So just take it when I say Handcash, I'm talking the customer, because I both built the system and I'm spending money on it. So let's say that Handcash is the customer, and I am Notarium, right? So when I first put this together, there was a bug in the Handcash BIP270 implementation, which wouldn't let me perform a BIP270 payment to a 0 Satoshi output, right? So as part of BIP270, you basically pass over from Notarium to Handcash. I end up passing them a output, a locking script that they then basically present on the mobile phone, along with metadata, to let the user know what they're paying for and how much they're paying. And that bit between that communication between my backend and the mobile app, where the mobile app needed to interpret that 0 Satoshi op return output, was broken on the Handcash side. I didn't want to wait for them. Now, they fixed it within 2 days, but I was on a weekend and I didn't want to wait for them, right? So I figured out, okay, I'll do a workaround. I'll just do the straight through spending, which then solved another problem for me as well. So I thought, okay, cool, that works, and I don't have to worry about it. But the cool thing here, of course, right, is that that BIP270 transaction that Handcash generates can accept a non-standard output, which is basically what I'm giving them, right? So they're not constraining me to only doing a pay-to-public key hash or something like that. It's complete non-standard output that Handcash allows me to have in the fragment that I send back to them. But I want to share my screen again now so that I can talk to you guys, because you probably have been reading this diagram already. That's why I stopped sharing it. Which one do I want to share?
Okay, another quick. Basically,
Sure.
Why not just? I'm just curious, because you guys probably know the deterministic HD keys, right? So you can actually you can put just something like a root public key in your server, and then you can generate more public keys, right? Derive more public keys. without putting the private key there. So isn't that more secure? You can just, you can just spend to this new public derived public keys, right? Your private key is somewhere else. Is that an alternative? Because that's what I would do it. How I would do it, right? Because say one transaction.
Right. Yes. That's true. That's true. That would be a better way of doing it. Then you don't have any private keys on the server side. Yes. Correct.
Okay.
Then you'd only be broadcasting the one transaction, and you wouldn't, and I wouldn't need to, of course, I wouldn't be spending it myself immediately. I would just broadcast the transaction that I received from as payment would be just be broadcast, but the keys to spend that would basically be offline. So yes, that would be a more secure option as well. Yes. And it's probably the preferred way to do it. Yeah, so you're correct.
Yeah, that's what I would do. Yeah. Anyway, the only thing I can say is you need some kind of like a special wallet to spend it because it's a non-standard, right? So it's not a pay to public hash because there's some. I think you can share us some like a transaction ID. So what you said is probably you push the hash and then drop it, right? And then followed by pay to public hash. The script, how does a script in the output look like?
Oh, right. Yeah, the output is basically a fragment, which is sort of a 4-byte fragment with that's just the text NOTA, so that I could, if I were to scan the blockchain, I could always find the transactions again. So it's NO2A followed by a colon, followed by the SHA-256 hash, which is one data chunk. So op-push, which is basically an op-push data, and then followed by op-drop, followed by the regular pay-to-public key hash locking conditions.
Yeah, it would be great if you can show us some later in the blockchain explorer. Show us a script. That would be interesting to see.
Oh, sure. I'll do that.
Not now. Anytime.
Yeah.
Just
okay.
Okay.
All right. So all of that, right? You guys now have seen how from the user experience point of view, the user basically performed their action on the site. They went into the checkout process. They went to pay, and in order to pay, they then scanned using their mobile phone, and immediately were presented with who they're paying to, how much they're going to pay, and they just have to swipe on the mobile phone. And then immediately when they did that, the browser also presented, which could also be the cash register, right? The browser just said, okay, the payment has been received. And I'm going to talk through how all of this sort of orchestration and coordination between the various, sort of a little dance that you end up doing. So once the website here, right? Once the website basically has to, once you get to the checkout flow where you're presenting the QR code, essentially what the QR code represents is a URL that points to an invoice that has been generated by the server. So in my backend, after you've actually dropped, so because of the way that I'm doing it, right? Once you actually drop the file, what I actually do is I calculate the SHA-256 hash, and then I ask the server to immediately create an invoice, and then to provide me with the URL pointing at that invoice, right? So the server passes me back a QR code or an invoice URL, and that invoice URL is basically what goes into the QR code. This is part of the BIP270 specification, that the QR code essentially contains the URL where you look up the actual invoice. So it's not the invoice itself. So that's step one. I generate on the server side an invoice, and then step two, I present that invoice for scanning. The Handcash app in step three scans the invoice. That payment URL is passed to the Handcash backend. Now, I am not sure that this is what's happening, right? I'm not sure that, because this is a Handcash infrastructural and implementation detail. I'm assuming that Handcash passes it to their backend, and then their backend makes the query to the URL to fetch the invoice, and then passes that that fragment back to the mobile phone. They could just as well, for the mobile phone, could just as well be hitting this, could be making this connection directly to fetch the payment URL. So, and then, to use the payment URL to fetch the invoice directly. I don't know which one of those two it is, right? But the consequence of step 4, where where Handcash now has my payment URL, is that they fetch they basically hit the backend, fetch the actual invoice, and then present all the metadata that's contained in the invoice along with the payment request to the user on the mobile phone here, right? Which basically is, once you get to step 6, all the metadata has basically been fetched. You are now being presented with the payment invoice, essentially, right? So this is basically, you are basically being asked now, okay, so this is what you're paying, this is who you're paying, swipe to send them 5 cents. Now, when the user swipes, what actually happens is step 7, the mobile phone now sends me a transaction. Now, again, I don't know if from Handcash point of view, the mobile phone is sending the transaction directly to me, or whether it's sending it to their backend and their backend is sending it to me. Let's just say that it's sending that the mobile phone sends to the merchant's backend directly the payment once you, because on my backend, basically what happens is I actually get the transaction. I get the signed transaction, which is ready to be broadcast. So here in point 7 or step 7, I'm getting the signed transaction from the mobile phone, which is ready to be broadcast. And then I immediately broadcast that and return in response success. And if the success response is received by the mobile from my end, meaning that I signify that my miner, because I broadcast to the miner API, the miner has accepted my transaction, 0 confirmation. I'm not going to wait on the miner. I just say, boom, the miner has accepted it. Then I let Handcash know, okay, my miner has accepted my transaction. We're all good, right? You can basically present to the user that the transaction has been sent or the payment has been sent, transaction successful. You get step 9. If anything goes wrong in my backend, whether I have a problem with my IP connection to the miner, or if the miner refuses to accept the transaction because it's been double spent, or for example, or if there's sort of any problem that happens in the backend, right? I return a unauthorized notification or any sort of anything other than 200 OK to the mobile, and the mobile phone presents an error to the user, and the whole payment process basically cuts out, right? It doesn't happen, doesn't go through. The user doesn't get to walk out of the store at this point with the goods, and the mobile phone won't actually, the person won't actually be charged, right? So okay, so that is basically now at this last step, right, when the payment is sent, the other thing that of course happens is once I've successfully broadcast, I return a success response. But because I've got a WebSocket connection to the front end on the website, I then also push successful notification to the website, which is why you would see on the website immediately saying, okay, payment received, the mobile phone receives payment received. Now we're all good, right? And this web-based workflow would work just as well in a point of sale scenario, right? Over the counter payment scenario, the same kind of flow would work just as well. Yeah, that basically is sort of the nuts and bolts of it. Any other questions here?
Yeah, very cool. I think it's good to have the whole workflow. In the ideal world, I would even just want to see the code, to walk through it, to convince myself, okay, this is how it's done. Because it's like now it's like a magic box, right? I want to poke around. So first of all, I'm a little bit surprised. You're saying your server broadcasts the transaction. I always thought like a wallet broadcasted. No, I thought
no. The merchant in BIP270, the merchant broadcasts the transaction.
Okay, interesting.
The wallet could broadcast it. I mean, it's optional. But essentially what Handcash does, right, is that they wait for me to confirm that I have broadcast the transaction and spent the user's funds, before anything happens. And they probably, if I were them, right, that I would be monitoring the blockchain to make sure that me as the merchant, I'm not going to be lying to them, right? I could always say that I didn't spend it, there was an error, and then the user basically doesn't get their money, right? So I would assume, I don't know this for a fact, but I would assume that the best practice in this instance would be for the wallet implementation, in this case Handcash, to also monitor the blockchain to essentially check when the transaction, because they would have a copy of that transaction, right? When that transaction shows up on the blockchain. And it should be instantaneous if they have the infrastructure. If they have a node running, right, it will be instantaneous, like within 1 second they will receive it. Because you saw this end-to-end flow is very quick. Right?
Yeah, I think I have a similar, exact same question. So why don't Handcash also broadcast its transaction, and then there's another transaction that the merchant broadcasts?
It wouldn't be accepted. It wouldn't be accepted by, so the mining, sorry, the node network is so tightly connected, right? That in the interim between when I broadcast it and Handcash tries to broadcast it, essentially the node network will pick up that this transaction, that the UTXO has already been spent. The transaction spending the wallet, the UTXO that the wallets are spending from, those are now attached to the spending transaction, right? Any subsequent transaction that shows up on the network trying to spend those same ones will be rejected out of hand. So if Handcash tries to broadcast again, they will receive a weird error from the miner, right? And I saw this happening as I was testing and making errors and mistakes within my code, that if I try to broadcast or basically broadcast the same transaction twice, and the miner basically gives me an error, and this is way before confirmation, right? Once the miner has the transaction, they won't accept the second transaction into their network or a second spend into their network. They will basically tell you that this output or the input wasn't found, right? But it's not really the input. What they really mean to say is the UTXO is unspendable because it's been spent already.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's too. It's a double spend. It's the same transaction being broadcasted by two different merchants. Because the way I understood, like in Bitcoin, was a merchant can broadcast the transaction or the user can broadcast the transaction. It doesn't matter to the miner. Whoever broadcasts the transaction, it'll be considered as one transaction. But it doesn't matter. The more, the better, because that's based on the miner's perspective. It's a first seen rule. So however, whoever does it first, it'll accept it. And the second one is not. It's not a double spending because it's the same transaction. It's the same transaction. Yeah. It's just a. It's not a double. It's not a double spend of UTXO where there are two transactions, but it's the same transaction being broadcasted by two different. Because that will, because I think over time. Because if that happens, because we can easily switch from like Handcash to a different wallet provider, because it'll be just a seamless. Because now if there is a dependency between those two, I think in the future probably there might be some concerns if we need to switch between different wallets. That if we are waiting for one after the other, probably that might have some issues. I'm just thinking out loud, but yeah. So
no, you're perfectly correct, right? Ideally, it's no, or rather, broadcasting of the same transaction is idempotent. It won't make any difference to the network. You should be able to broadcast the same transaction from two different sources onto the network at the same time. On the implementation side of the miner API, though, the miner API will actually check whether or not the outputs that you're trying to spend have already been spent. If a transaction spending those exist, it will just reject it out of hand. Maybe if you're not using the miner API and you're running your own either a listening node which can broadcast on your behalf, or an actual mining node which can broadcast on your behalf. Actually, no, even then, I've tried this on my local computer with just a test net running on my local computer. Before the Bitcoin node itself will refuse to accept the second transaction, to throw an error. That is literally what it does. It throws an error. So the moment that the UTXO is marked as being spent by the node, it won't accept a second transaction. It will throw an error. So it comes down to error handling on my part and error handling on their part, right? So yes, we can both broadcast the transaction at the same time, but the problem is that in the way that we're trying to you're trying to do this dance between the merchant and the wallet infrastructure, it's nice for the merchant to get a yes, successfully spent or successfully broadcast notification on their end, rather than for them to get a weird error, and the error won't be, okay, yes, sure, the transaction you're trying to send has already been sent onto the network. No, it will be the outputs you're trying to spend have already been spent error. Right, that's just the weird way, and it will create all sorts of confusion.
Okay.
So from the practical implementation standpoint, it kind of makes sense that the merchant broadcasts the transaction. The wallet service provider just listens to make sure that there is non-repudiation on the merchant side. Right, the merchant can't claim they didn't send it because they can listen and actually know that yes, it has gone through. Just as sort of an additional check on their side before they actually end up notifying, or even they can notify their wallet, right? It's the risk that they're taking on behalf of their customers, essentially at the end of the day. And there has to be some amount of trust in this relationship as well. I guess, well, not necessarily, there doesn't have to be an amount of trust, but you're buying something over the counter, the merchant's going to expect to get their money. It's best if everybody plays nice in the ecosystem, because you're not working with, we're talking small casual payments here anyway, right? Nobody wants to screw anybody else and hurt your own reputation because you've got customers to serve that you want to come back and spend again, right? So it's in everybody's best interest to just play nice. We're not trying to rug each other out of millions of dollars, right? It's a 5-cent payment.
Double spend me, please.
So double spend my 5-cent transaction. So yeah, I guess that, so these are kind of nuances, but it's a great question, right? It's a great point that you're making, because these things have to be considered in both from the point of view of the security, but also from the point of view of what it is that we're actually trying to do. In this case, I'm just trying to make a small casual transaction. But you are not wrong with the security model that you're proposing either, right? There are sort of a couple of edge cases where you can get caught out if you're not entirely perfect about it, entirely on your toes, I should say. I did want to mention this though. In all of this, the one interesting thing that I did, so I tested SendB and Relay wallets, right? With the for scanning of the BIP270 URL. Relay failed to recognize the URL, or the QR code. Relay failed to recognize the QR, or refused to recognize the QR, say failed. Relay didn't understand the QR code. SendB understood the QR code, but refused to generate a spending transaction for a non-standard output. So SendB couldn't do a non-standard output. I had a second problem, which has been, so the Handcash guys have since patched the problem with being able to send an op return, or rather to send to generate an output that has 0 satoshis attached to it. They fixed that problem on their side. I haven't actually tested it myself. They told me to test it, but because I'd already moved on and solved the problem in a different way, I should go back, right? I'm sure the guys are still waiting for me to come back with a test. It's been 2 weeks now. I'm beginning to feel a bit bad, actually, now that I mention it. Handcash guys, if you're watching, I'm so sorry.
Okay.
I'll test to let you guys know. But yeah, the Handcash support team has been amazing. They've been really on the ball. They've been turning around fixes for small issues that I had within days. So yeah, kudos to them.
Good. So another point I want to make why the merchant broadcast is, of course, sCrypt has been saying this forever, right? Because you want to get paid, right? Otherwise, the user can can redirect the same output to some other people. You cannot trust the user, right? So I mean, unless there's special case you may trust, right? But in general, you don't want to trust the user. You want to, it's like somebody give you a check, right? Before somebody can spend all the money, you want to deposit as soon as possible, right? You don't want to wait for 3 months or something, or rely on even on hand cash to redeem it for you, right? You want to be, it's your money, right? You want to be sure.
Yeah.
So
that's a good point.
So-
That's a good point.
yeah, so it's independent of whether the wallet will broadcast it. Of course, if I'm a merchant, I want to broadcast as soon as possible because I want to win the race, right? If somebody wants to do some funny business, I want to, preempted them to spend, right? So it's in my pocket. Another thing,
I'm going to oh, sorry, go ahead.
can you share the screen again? So I'm really curious. So for all
the diagram. Okay,
yeah, for this invoice and URL, is that part of the BIP270 or is it a separate thing? Is it part of the standard?
Hang on, what am I sharing? Just give me a second. I'm trying to figure out which screen I need to share here. Okay. Sorry, can you ask your question again?
Yeah, so you have a URL, you have invoice. Are all this part of the BIP270 standard, or is something like application specific? Let's say format of the invoice.
It's a format of the format for the invoice is a JSON formatted output, which is part of the standard. The same for the URL. The URL is basically a specific URL which will on the mobile phone experience is actually a deep link URL that you can just immediately, if you're on the browser, I just do a window that open. If you're on mobile, you can use a URL launcher, to just launch the URL as a URI, and it will basically be, if there is on Android at least, if there's an action associated with that URI, it will open up the app, right? So I can deep link into the Handcash app with the payment URL on my mobile phone. So if I'm on my mobile phone, I just need to tap the QR code. Then it will immediately open up deep link into the Handcash because Handcash is registered itself as a handler for that URI on the mobile phone. So it all works out. I'd be interesting to know. Sorry, Kevin, did you use an Android phone, desktop, or iOS device?
So I started it on my desktop or my laptop, but then I made the payment with my iPhone using Handcash.
Oh, okay, all right.
And then also when I did it, the payment went through and then nothing responded right away on the user interface. Like when you did it, it immediately said payment received. But when I did it, it didn't. And I just gave it some time and then I did a refresh. But then what I did do is I re-uploaded the document and it came up and it said payment was pending. So I should double check it again right now to see what it looks like. But yeah, so there's a few little bugs, but the general idea was great. And it's I think it's an idea that's been floating around for a while, and it's nice to see that you've actually implemented it. So it's very exciting.
Yeah, cool.
In that invoice URL, what information is being passed from the that is basically of the file? I think you mentioned about the file itself. Is there anything that's passed on?
It's just a regular URL. Yeah, it's just for right now. Okay, so in my case, I actually pass on the hash of the document because as a query parameter, or rather as part of the path, is a part of the path in the URL, because the URL could be anything, right? It just has to have to say that the scheme just has to be fixed. So you have to have the scheme, your own host, and then followed by an arbitrary path on the host where it can where the invoice can be discovered. So any identifying resource locator, right, it's unique to that invoice is fine. The only things that are specified from the specs point of view is the scheme, which is pay question mark / or question mark pay colon, like a weird little deep link URI scheme. That's the only thing that's specific to the spec. And the rest is basically just a standard HTTPS URL that will be resolved by the system. And in my case, I pass 2 bits of data back redundantly. Actually, I pass the hash of the WebSocket connection so that I can know where to send the notification, as well as the hash of the document which the invoice is associated with, so that I can look up the correct invoice for payment.
So if you want me to, I could show you what happens when you upload a document, because this is the one that I did last night, and it's great. Yeah, like you obviously know how this works, Stefan, but all right. So there it is. It says this document has been timestamped, and then that was the time. That was last night. So right now it's Friday. That was last night at Thursday. And so it's perfect. It's great. And then I could view transaction, or I could copy transaction link. So let's see what happens. But yeah, when I first did it, nothing happened immediately on the, oh, whoops. Sorry, my mouse just dropped on the ground and I opened up the notes.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out. So the reason why it might get wonky now and again is I've got this WebSocket connection for sending notifications back to the browser. And if the WebSocket connection gets wonky, I've implemented all sorts of crazy logic already to try and maintain a stable WebSocket connection with retries, etc. But really, if the WebSocket connection is not intact in that period where you are trying to wait, it will drop. And I've gotten it stable to the point now where I've never had it happen to me again, because it was happening all the time initially. So I was surprised to hear that it happened to you. I'll go and check.
It may have happened to,
yeah,
it may have happened too, because I opened it and then I'm like, oh, and I might have put it off. I forget exactly how it happens, but I might have put it off till later. You know what I mean? So I opened the site and I'm like, oh, I have to have hand cache, but I didn't have my phone by me. But then later I came and did it or something. I don't know. But it works. It
the only thing that I can think of, right, is that so it will definitely do a retry. The moment the socket connection drops, it immediately reconnects to it. It's in the retry pattern. What could happen though is if your computer is in sleep mode and you come back, and before you have a stable internet connection, you end up trying to transact. That's the only thing that I can think that would sort of on the fly introduce a delay in the socket reconnecting to the backend, because I know that it basically sits on a loop trying to reestablish connection within less than a second.
Awesome.
So,
well, it works and it's cool. So
right,
I'm stoked about it.
I wanted to show the what's on chain transaction that Xiaohui have asked about. Let me quickly see if I can bring up my Chrome. Right, so you guys can see my what's on chain. So this is transaction. This is the transaction I just sent a few minutes ago. So if I look at the script output, right? So here you can see it, right?
Drop it.
So it's the chunk of data followed by opprop, and then just followed by a regular pay to pub key hash script would normally have the shape, right? Obdup hash 160 pub key hash verify checksec. But yeah, this is the shape of the transaction, and the output is essentially, as you can see here, it's now 47,000 satoshis. I'm making more money now because I'm making more satoshis because the Bitcoin price is crashing, and I'm pegging it to the US dollar for my payment.
Okay, nice.
So
I could imagine if you if you put the transaction ID, whatever you push in the beginning is most of the data you push there, it will be the transaction ID. No, the hash of the document.
sorry, when you say most of the data?
Yeah, you push data, right? And then you drop it. I'm saying the most part, for the most part, is just the hash of the document, right?
Yeah. The first 4 bytes are actually should be the character ASCII characters in OTA.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if you were to hex decode that. Do I have hex to bin on my computer? Let me see.
That's fine. I think just want to double check. Okay. And by the way, I think I haven't tried it myself, but I heard that the money button also supports arbitrary, just so-called non-standard, which is standard anyway, which is non-standard script output too. So you may want to add that. Yeah.
I've done it with money button before. Yes. So I've done non-standard output with money button before. Actually, I've got another weird reason why I only implemented this with hand cache, right? I wanted to get this done quickly. I didn't want to support too many payment methods. So I tried to narrow the scope for the MVP down to, I'm going to support one guy. I'm going to make it work in one very narrow use case. And it's going to be this way so that I can take the learnings from that to decide what I'm going to do next. And I might still not implement other Bitcoin payment providers for the time being, because the next time I want to implement fiat payments. And the whole fiat payment process ties into some backend account management that I want to build out potentially for use cases where you might. There are certain scenarios where folks might want to use the service that I can foresee without wanting to acquire Bitcoin themselves in order to do it. And in order to do that, there are 2 scenarios that follow on to that. I want the case where a person wants to prepay in fiat for make a bulk purchase. I'm hoping that they do that because, it's always better to take a large payment up front. They want to prepay for a bulk purchase, or they want to prepay for a bulk purchase for a group of people, right? So in a typical office environment, you'd have an administrator who just makes payment and then distributes tokens, and then those tokens can then be used to redeem whatever service it is, right? So that's kind of the use case I want to go for next. So I want to essentially now experiment with redeemable tokens for as payment for timestamping rather than Bitcoins. So that's the next experiment that I want to run.
About the hash of the file again. So you said, I mean, it can be checked on chain. Where exactly? Would you be able to show us, like in the Explorer, say, okay, this is exactly the hash of the file? Is there a way to see that?
No. You basically. So I just showed you, right? So what you've seen is basically as much as you can see. Let me see if I can bring up the Explorer again.
So it doesn't really reveal the hash of the file as a public. It just part of it. No,
it's publicly. Yeah, it's publicly revealed. I mean, you can't. It's the whole point of a hash, right? Is that it is a one-way latch. You can't infer any information about what. There is no data leakage from the hash backwards to the datum that was hashed. Right, so the hash is completely private and anonymous in this regard as well, because
So when you're checking the file back, you check against the hash of the original file, or how do you do that?
The hash of the original file.
Oh, okay.
The
So
hash of the original file.
Okay, so you rerun the SHA-256 and then find the hash again and go back in on chain, or you check against the. Where do you check it against? So how do you?
I rerun the hashing algorithm against the file, get that hash, and then look up that hash to make sure that it actually exists.
Okay, and when you look up in the server, or you look up on chain?
I look up on the server.
The server.
I look up on the server. Yeah, I look up on my server.
Oh, okay, got it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Cool. Yeah, you don't want to look through like terabytes blocks to just find this tiny needle, right? In the sea of it is little, man. It's literally 250 bits. So if you can bring on the screen again, I think just the workflow diagram.
Okay, I'm going to bring it up. There you go.
So two things I want to talk about. First, how would people do this in BTC world? Because then the wallet will broadcast, right? And then the merchant will run the full node and then check it, right?
Oh, so you can't do it in, yeah, you can't do it in BTC. You can't do any of this in BTC because of replace by fee, right? Even if the merchant gets a successful broadcast onto the network, the client, the guy can literally walk out the front door. As long as the transaction hasn't confirmed on the network yet, he can rebroadcast a higher fee transaction, spending the same outputs, and basically rug the merchant, right? That's what replaced by fee. Replaced by fee should literally be called rug by fee, because that's what it is.
Pretty much, yes. That just want to see the architectural difference. You know, the how it,
no, this can't work in BTC. BTC is dead for payments. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, they can store some value, but anyway. So the other thing is, what would the workflow look like if just from a hand cache user to user? So that in that case, definitely the hand cache will broadcast, because that's nobody user cannot just find some endpoint to broadcast, right?
Oh, hand cache.
Basically the server here.
The
the user pays it to, I ping you some dons, right? So in that case, they will broadcast.
Oh yeah, when you're just doing friend to friend with hand cache, then they're basically the hand cache backend broadcast the server for you. I see you smiling, Kevin.
That brings me the follow-up.
Sorry,
question,
I was it actually had nothing to do with you. I was thinking about somebody else. So sorry. Zoom is confusing like that. Yeah.
So that's my follow-up question. Because let's say I just want to build some website like this, right? But then I need to find how easy is to find like a merchant API that can accept my transaction. I can just go to Tile, and let's say some new developer just come in and they want to, spin up a site and sell something, right? I don't know.
Yeah.
Coffee cup, mugs, whatever, right? So they need to find some like a minor API endpoint. Is that right? That's how they do it.
Yes. Okay. Sorry. MAPI. I'm getting confused now. Now I don't know if I've got the wrong name, because I've been saying merchant API the whole time. Is it minor API or merchant API?
I think I get sometimes called MAPI. I think it's all the same thing.
MAPI, right? So
yes,
that's the thing.
Yeah.
So I just went with what's on chain. That's the one that I'm using right now, which is basically operated by Tile, right? So Tile purchased what's on chain. That's the one I'm using.
And for now,
I didn't even look
free
for anybody else.
Okay.
It's free for now. Yeah.
Okay.
I think that Attila arrows with what is the pool that they were running a while back? Metapool. Yeah. I think they have an API or had an API as well. I don't know who else was running an endpoint. Maybe Gorilla Pool either has one or will be having one soon. TM, I don't know.
Okay, TM. Yeah, I don't know if it makes sense also for wallets to provide such service. I don't know, because
I think so, and maybe not even just wallets, right? So one of the things somebody on Twitter was moaning today about instability in the minor API, and the immediate thought that came to my mind was that the reason why you would probably not run your own listening node is probably because of cost. But if there is a large enough ecosystem of merchants out there to support a paid service, then you can literally do payment channels with microtransactions the way that Koju is done for their API, right? To essentially provide a paid service for this. Part of the problem is right now is a chicken and an egg problem. there aren't enough merchants who would be willing to pay for the service to make it worthwhile for somebody to spin up a commercial node to provide this as a commercial service. At the same time, the merchants probably are being held back from adoption because there aren't any merchant API nodes that are reliable, blah, 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 right? So two-sided marketplace, you're trying to bootstrap both of them at the same time. It's going to take a while, I think.
Okay. So for all the wallets, is it always, if let's say user I send some transaction, it's always from my phone to the backend and then backend directly to the miners? There's never like more hops, is it? They don't go to,
Unfortunately, I've got no insight into the backend implementation by any of these guys, right? So I don't know. Yeah, I could only speculate about the way in which they actually have their infrastructure implemented.
Okay.
I don't know. Maybe if we can convince one of the guys from Handcash to come on, maybe they'll. If they don't consider their infra trade secret, right? Maybe they'll be happy to talk to us about how they implemented it, because it can be implemented in any one of a number of ways, right? You could, if it's friend-to-friend payment, you could literally just broker a communications channel through the server. In other words, if I'm trying to send to you, I could send the transaction to the backend. The backend can forward the transaction to you because we've both got persistent connections to the backend, and then you can broadcast the transaction on, right? And then say to the merchant API or to wherever. That is one way of potentially performing it, which is still a peer-to-peer transaction where you kind of have a high degree of certainty. The other one is just, of course, where I send it to the server broadcasts it, and the server notifies both of us that, yeah, it's gone through, you're good to go. You can spend your money.
I just did it a second time right now and it worked without the bug. So
okay.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yep.
So one of the questions that I have, so for example, like, if we need to replace, or not replace, but say right now it's integrated to Handcash, right? And Handcash to provide that payment service, the wallet service for you. What if we could, like, if we wanted to add more like wallet providers for that service? Would it be from a like how would it be from a broadcast perspective? So what I'm saying is, like, you create a hash of a file, and then you're ready to now send that transaction over for payment and whatever. Can we say, like, pick any of the wallets? It doesn't have to be Handcash. It could be any of the wallets, whichever first sends the payment back. That's what broadcasts the transaction over, versus having to pick having to pick like one of the wallets or specific wallets. So is there a way we could, like, any wallets could, whichever first broadcast or whichever first sends the payment through the wallet, that is the one that will be added to the to the transaction. Does that make sense? Or
yeah, as long as all of the wallet providers implement BIP270, right?
Mm-hmm.
If they all have a strong BIP270 implementation, from me, the merchant's point of view, I don't really care who sends me the transaction, right?
Right.
Because in fact, right now, I don't know that it's Handcash sending the transactions to me on the back end, right? If Kevin was able to use a BIP270 wallet other than Handcash that actually worked, I wouldn't know, right? That it was actually that he was using a Handcash wallet in his instance. Me as the merchant, I wouldn't know. And that is because the BIP270 protocol is standard in that sense. That also means that, so I don't know if that answers the question for you.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does.
Money button. Go ahead.
Yeah, as long as the wallet is able to meet the standard of BIP270, it works. It doesn't matter which wallet you're sending the payment from. Right?
Yeah.
Okay, makes sense. Yep.
And then I was going to ask, is money button a BIP270?
I have no idea. I
right,
really
I'll find
don't
out.
know.
I'm gonna try it. I gotta try it and we'll find out.
I have another question.
Go
So
ahead.
if I need to, like create a plug and play kind of thing, so use whatever you build into another, like say another website or whatever from a plug and play perspective, how difficult is it going to be, or do I have to go through your website? Is there a way, it could be a plug and play kind of thing where I could just pick your API and put it into any other services and all of that would work through? Is that?
I would say that if you wanted to make this portable, so the components that are necessary for you to actually implement are, you would need to have a web widget, which is totally doable. Right now, my client-side code is not abstracted into a widget, but you would need a web widget for starters. The other component is that you need a server backend, right? So if you had, but the backend on my side is not very complicated. It could easily be a AWS Lambda, right? It could easily be a serverless script that's very lean and very lightweight in the backend. But you would need at least these two components. You need a publicly addressable URL on the internet where the invoice can come from. And then you need a way of presenting the payment URL to the user in the form of a QR code or a button that they can click, which redirects them into or deep links them into the mobile app, for example.
Okay.
I just tried to use Money Button, but it's just the tap QR code to pay. And so then I clicked it and tried to extract out the address from the URL, but I couldn't figure out which was the address. So it didn't work, but maybe.
Yeah.
Handcash is great though. That's what he's.
Yeah, I don't know. I've got feelings about Money Button and the payment experience with Money Button, and not necessarily good feelings. It doesn't feel snappy to me. It doesn't feel fast. It doesn't feel quick. I don't know that I would be able to replicate this quick payment experience, sort of this quick user flow, right? Especially on mobile. If I'm on mobile with the same app, I tap the QR code and it pops into, right? This snappy experience, I don't know if I'd be able to get that. Well, I know that I don't.
Yeah, it was
with Money Button.
Right. I think Money Button was built more as like built into the web browser thing, but then they started running into problems with at least on Safari. Like Apple is super strict about their privacy and tracking, and they have all these things, and it wouldn't work unless you turned off these privacy controls. But it works on Chrome. Fine. But yeah, I think having a wallet, it needs to either be built into the browser or it needs to be on an app like Handcash is. But yeah, I have Money Button and I have Handcash, I have RelayX. Maybe that'll work. I'll try RelayX.
Which wallets now support BIP270 besides Handcash?
So SendBee supports it as well. The caveat here being that SendBee's BIP270 implementation right now does not seem to support the non-standard outputs, right? So
okay. How about RelayX?
RelayX didn't recognize the QR code at all.
Okay.
Yep, there you go.
Okay.
Invalid QR code.
Okay. Cool.
I wonder in the future if there's going to be more wallets. There has to be, right? We'll see. I feel like eventually Apple or some major company is going to just buy some of these. They'll buy Handcash, and it just needs to be integrated into the operating system. And then they'll give everybody an API or something. I don't know. It's just my thoughts on it. But yeah, I think Handcash is the leader right now. So it makes sense to use Handcash.
Yeah. Thank you, Stefan. This is pretty cool. Just to see it out there, pretty cool stuff.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, very cool. If you ever want to pursue this long term into a product everybody wants to use, I really want to see a DocuSign integrate with this, some kind of thing, you know, so
Yeah.
you know it's all time stamped, nobody can cheat, and it's already always there. So it'll be great. And then you can also sign with your, you know, with your wallet, right? Not some like a handwritten, like sketchy things. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just out, just, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Adobe. You know, because Adobe, it's like if you want to sign a document, I'm really like if you're not on Mac or Windows, it's really a horrible experience to sign any document. So that would be great if there was another way to sign them.
So yeah, the one thing that I guess I probably should maybe make a little bit more obvious about what the service does at the moment, right? And what it is useful for. It specifically is not although the name is Notarium, really, you know, the notary part of the service relates to the digital timestamping. It does not have anything to do with any sort of contractual binding that occurs between when you sign with a digital signature, right? So there are no digital signatures involved in anything of what I'm doing at the moment. For there to be a digital signature involved, there needs to be a wallet involved. And for there to be a wallet involved, the wallet needs to support generation of signatures over arbitrary data, right? BIP270 doesn't support signing workflows like that. The Money Button's web wallet does support signing flows,
Yes.
but then, you know, I don't know how you would integrate that with a physical document, right? So you would literally need a new kind of wallet that understands both the document as well as, or not the document itself, but can work with the document in an offline manner, or at least as part of this workflow, right? As well as the ability to then generate an appropriate digital signature as part of the process. Now, yes, I've played around with the idea, and as a first step, I've thought that it might be interesting because I looked at the DocuSign APIs, and I'm convinced that I can, as part of the DocuSign APIs, embed a timestamp for starters into the document. In order for there to be a signature in the document, you know, you basically have to be maybe a signature over the hash embedded in the document at the end of the workflow for the process. And these things are possible to do, but then you'd need to essentially move the person's document through a workflow that integrates into your application somehow. And so that's one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is just to use workflow tools. There is sort of this long list of prerequisites that I have in order to get to the stuff that I'm talking about now. Let's say, for example, that I already have my API properly exposed in the backend, and that in order to use the API, the folks using the API have a good way of onboarding into my application, right? Whether it's with AndCash Connect, with Money Button signing in, or with some means, right? So there's a good onboarding experience. You essentially now have a SaaS-based API that you provision, which can, and that API can now form part of either the Zapier integration, right? With an API integration through Zapier, we can do workflows, or it can form part of a Microsoft. What is the Microsoft thing, which actually is also pretty cool? Microsoft has this workflow product. I was playing with it just the other day, and now I've completely forgotten. Workflow automation. It's called, literally just called Power Automate. Sorry, it's called Power Automate. So Microsoft has this really cool thing called Power Automate, which is pretty much similar to things like Zapier, but embedded in the Microsoft ecosystem, right? So it's actually really, really cool thing. Now, yes, there are all sorts of these things, these rabbit holes that I can go down, but I've got a couple of problems some of them are that my plate is really full, and I'm trying to run really small experiments right now to try and figure out what interesting things there are to be done with the tech, right? Because a lot of what I'm doing right now is still just learning. So I got a lot of learning out of implementing this BIP270 flow, because as far as I know, nobody has actually implemented it in the way that I've implemented it, which is also why, you know, I was running into the problems that I was running into with all of the wallet providers, because while they all claim to support it, they all had like limited support for it, which had some which have some rough edges at the moment. And that is simply because they've built it, but I think that, for example, Handcash is focused on Handcash Connect at the moment. I think that that SendBee is focused on their voucher integration with third parties. I think that RelayX is focused on okay,
NFT?
focused on NFTs and tokens right now, and payments are not a top priority, right? So yeah, I guess that's where we are with the ecosystem right now. It'd be nice if we could have like better and wider support for BIP270, only because it is a interoperable format, right?
Okay. What are some of the example information that's included in the invoice? Probably you have a receiver address, right? What else?
Just give me a second.
Mm-hmm.
I will bring up the technical documentation that talks about exactly the information that is in the invoice. I'm going to reference the Handcash documentation about this, because I think it's a good resource.
They also have like one in the like a spec in GitHub. I remember seeing it. Is it somewhere like a?
Yeah, it's the one
like
that I'm
TLC?
referencing now. Yeah, so I'm going to share this in the Slack as well. This is the documentation.
Outputs. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the JavaScript ends up looking like this, right? So the QR code would be a URL, which is, where is the payment URL? It starts basically URL that's formatted like this. Let me make this larger. This is not very readable. That's formatted like this. So it's pay : R equal and then HTTPS and then the full URL following that, right? That basically is what goes into the QR code. The actual result that comes back from fetching that QR code is basically this, which is the actual invoice descriptor.
Okay.
Is that readable?
Script. Yes. Script amount. Okay.
Yeah, and you can have multiple outputs. I've tried multiple outputs, it works.
What is the payment URL? What does that mean?
This is where once the mobile phone has actually signed the transaction, that's where they will send that's where they will submit the signed transaction for broadcast. So that's the merchant's endpoint where the merchant is expecting to have receive the signed transaction.
Okay. So this API, okay. It's just API. Okay. So it doesn't matter what language you have.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Did you share in the? Okay, I see.
Yeah, I shared the link in the Slack.
Nice. Yeah, I would really love you to change it such that you don't have private key on the server, because usually I think that's not safe. Even you spend it immediately, right? But that seems a little bit redundant, because you are spending from your UTXO to another UTXO.
No, it is redundant. You're 100% correct.
Okay.
And one more question. Can you get rid of your your server altogether and use the BSV blockchain itself for for storing the hash or whatever, and just use the Bitcoin blockchain itself, and not use the your personal server. Is that a possibility to do that or no? Does that question even make sense? Yeah.
Serverless.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's technically possible. The problem is that practically doesn't make practical sense, simply because of you're always going to come back to the question of how do I get my client, right, which would be my mobile phone, to interact with the blockchain to actually read the data on the blockchain. And in the early days, when we had very small amounts of data going through the network, if we had the power of today's telephones 10 years ago, when we had like small blocks and few and low transaction volume, it would probably have been possible to perform some sort of listening, like to have a listening node running on your mobile phone and be able to snarf your own transactions as they would go flying by, right? But from a practical standpoint, it doesn't make sense anymore. We have to move one step away from the blockchain to essentially have a cache, right? A caching server that caches only the transactions that we're interested in and doesn't actually look at the data that's on the entire blockchain. And the best way to cache is a write-through cache, meaning that when the data needs to get written to the persistent storage, which is the blockchain, it writes through my cache to the persistent storage, so that the cache basically holds a copy. That way, that if in the extreme circumstance the cache breaks, I can go and do the expensive work of basically rebuilding the cache from the source of truth, which is the persistent storage. But nobody should have to go directly to the chain without going through my cache first, right? That's just an optimization. That's sort of general, not even blockchain technology, right? This is just generally the way that you build performant web applications and performant web services.
Locality.
Yeah. So what was so maybe it's a kind of like a follow-up. So what was the motivation behind using this BIP270? Because I with the simplified payment, the SPV infrastructure, we can index, we can pull, like, I think the concern that you mentioned was more of a practical, how do I pull my particular file from that list of terabytes of data. But it's all to do with the Merkle true and the Merkle root and the Merkle proof, being able to provide that indexing and being able to quickly pull from these whole large set of data, being able to pull that particular set of files. So I think the whole motivation for using BIP270 is to utilize that infrastructure of that SPV, no? Or am I misunderstanding this?
So BIP270 doesn't actually explicitly have anything to do with SPV, but SPV, as you say, is a really good optimization in lieu of having a third party operating a cache on your behalf, right? So it can be part of the problem, of solution of not needing a third party running a cache. But then you need wallets for your specific use case to support BIP270 storage of the transactions that you're interested in. In my case, I will need to have a Notarium wallet that knows how to do, BIP270, that knows how to do SPV storage and lookup for the transactions for the timestamping transactions only, right? So I'm not interested in the payment transactions. The timestamping transactions, I need to basically provide Merkle proofs for and maintain those locally in my wallet. But even then, when I want to perform a lookup, I'm not going to hit the blockchain directly. When I want to verify the data on chain, I'm not going to hit the blockchain directly, because I'm not going to hit the node directly. I'm going to hit a miner API or a merchant API to query for a Merkle proof, because you can ask for a Merkle proof for a bit of data. And only in the extreme circumstance, where I end up running my own node, will I end up basically. So yeah, the way in which we're moving is to use cryptographic security through hashes and signatures to remove ourselves from the fire hose that is the main chain.
Yeah.
Where you
But I
can
think-
dip your toes in, but you don't want to stand in the middle of that flood all the time.
Yeah, I understand from a practical standpoint, but from the whole, like, if this, if this gets bigger and bigger, there's this trust part that I need to trust Stefan's server versus being able to use the Bitcoin infrastructure and all the protocols from that. I just feel like it makes sense, if when and where it gets bigger and there's more need for security on the server, I think it would make sense to think from now on to use that infrastructure from the Bitcoin and the protocol, because it basically implements all the protocol into your application, right? So just the thought process. But yeah, for right now, I think it absolutely makes sense for what you're doing. This is
Yeah, and I agree with you. I actually agree with you. The part of what is required in order to realize the vision that you have are native applications, which is basically what I'm working on next, right? So my next build out is to build a native application, because what you're referring to can't be done with a web application. And the reason it can't be done with a web application, well, it can be, but local storage, right, is the problem. If the user has to own the data, they can't be custodying the data with a third party. And the browser right now, at least as far as I know, is not a good substitute for managing file system data locally on a business computer. So you need a native application to do that.
Yep, absolutely.
That's why I built Dart SV. Anybody listening? Dart SV is the Flutter plugin that you need to build cross-platform native Bitcoin-enabled applications for your future SPV.
Sounds like a
Buy
as
now.
we just inserted.
Buy now.
Okay. Now ask your favorite developer if you have questions. Consult.
Ask a friendly neighborhood developer.
Yes. So another thing, so you just said that usually the wallet doesn't broadcast, but it needs to check the merchant has broadcasted. So the miners also offer such API to see if there's a certain transaction is in the mempool. How does the wallet check whether the merchant has broadcasted? They don't run their own node, right? They don't have to, right?
Oh, you can query the UTXO set for a private key that you control, right? So the APIs, the what's on chain API, for example, right, that they expose, allow you to query the UTXO set. So you can always do a UTXO query to know whether or not the so you can any one of a number of things. You can do a UTXO query if you are the person doing the spending. If you're the person with the keys, right? If it's my keys, then I can perform a UTXO query. If I want to check whether or not the transaction that I'm being given has already been spent, then I can do the same thing. I can look at the transaction, because the transaction that I'm getting is going to its inputs will explicitly reference the out point that it's trying to spend from. And then I can look up those out points again, do a UTXO query against those to see whether or not they've been spent.
Is there like a
ways,
more direct API? I want to see if this transaction is in the mempool, right? Is that such API?
Oh, by transaction ID. Yeah, you look up by transaction ID. Yeah. You can look up the transaction ID.
Even it's not mine yet, I can still query that, right?
Yes.
Okay, that'll be more direct, because at UTXO, I think that's more maybe a little bit more heavier, because you have to index and whether spend or not. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
So you can pull down just a little bit of data, or you can pull down the entire raw transaction by transaction ID.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I would imagine this what you have built here is the way I see it is almost like a template, because if you're selling any kind of service or goods using Bitcoin as payment, the workflow, I don't, maybe some minor change, but the architectural workflow should be all very similar. So I hope this can be very helpful for anybody who wants to sell anything, right? Or take a Bitcoin as payment, right? Either Starbucks or you're selling NFT or whatnot. It's probably similar workflow. Yeah, very cool.
Yeah, I would love to experiment with a wallet that does a BIP270 implementation for spending tokens. Because BIP270 doesn't say anything about the fact, doesn't mean that it has. BIP270 is a framework for spending something, right? And I don't think it has to be a Bitcoins. So my next experiment will basically be to see if I can create a token and spend that token in the BIP270 structure, which will be interesting.
Nice. What's the future plan for this Notarium? Is it mostly for learning, or what you are going to bring into mass adoption? Or
it's primarily for learning. It's primarily for learning at the moment, because there are a number of, the Notarium itself is really something that is allowing me to build out both competency, but also to test some of the other bits of ecosystem components that I'm trying to build out, right? There are other things that I want to build, but I need to deepen my understanding of certain things, which Notarium is a small enough use case for me, where I can sort of run the experiments that I need to, that allow me to build up the things around the edges that I'm really interested in. At the same time, I'm using Notarium to learn about things like writing effective copy for driving engaging traffic to a site, like the next version. So the learnings that I take is not necessarily just Bitcoin related from it, right? I'm running a whole bunch of experiments with this. Some of it are user research, conversion for e-commerce, making sure that I can, for example, from the point of view of launching a product, conceive, launch, bring to market, and then effectively market the product into the correct demographic, in discovering what the demographic is to obtain product market fit, right? Yeah, and just in launching the service, I've already learned one very important thing, which is that my opinion right now is that the timestamping thing is probably a feature of a different product that I want to build, right? So I don't think timestamping is a product. I think that the product is something else, and the timestamping is a feature of that other thing. Now, I know what that other thing is. I'm building that other thing right now.
Go ahead.
I was thinking that it would be cool, like on even just my personal notes when I'm writing notes, if it just like every so often put a hash, timestamped a hash, or like if you're writing a Word document, it just published the hash. So it was like built into it, and nobody would know because you'd never published the document. But if you ever needed to go back and prove that, hey, at this point in time, I was thinking about this, then you could. I don't know if that makes sense. I don't know exactly how that would work within a user interface and stuff, but yeah, patents, I think what you said.
Patents. That's the first.
Patents, yeah.
That's my first thought when I first hear about this. I thought, oh, this could be used for patent, because instead of filing to the patent office, right? That takes, I don't know, lawyers, all the hassles. You can just quickly just say, hey, I invented this, the Wright brothers. I invented. Imagine this, right? If I want to troll Craig, he could use this when he first write the white paper, right? So nobody can, but Bitcoin doesn't exist. So anyway, he could use some sort of
there's a term called the poor man's patent. And if you watch the video I did before the Craig Wright one, yeah, there's the poor man patent. but that's actually not enforceable within court. You actually have to have a real patent. But you could also have something called prior art, where if you published it publicly without getting a patent, then you also have protection. But if you keep it to yourself and you just do a poor man's patent, I don't know how much value that has, but it could be useful in just proving that, hey, I was thinking about this. Or like, let's say it's a card flipping game, or like even just like a dating app where you do where both people, I've actually never used a dating app, so I don't know how these things work, but I know that it's like you say, I like you, and then the other person says that I like you. And then if you both get the match, you see what I mean? But when you're doing the hash, you're basically broadcasting information without revealing what it is. But then you get that timestamp, and then, so it's all kind of related. I don't know if that made sense.
Actually, during the court case in like Craig versus Kleiman, they actually pulled some Slack, information as like valid, thing. So to your point about patenting, I don't think I think the systems are evolving, like with any kind of file being a used as like an attestation. It doesn't have to be like an official document. So I think it's going to evolve over time. Like even the patent services, it could be just like Stefan's Notarium is going to be considered, any file that's hashed is going to be a patent. So it might evolve over time with, especially with blockchain. So because we're already seeing a lot of things where, people just pull out any file and put it as an official document in some kind of like court case or something. So
so this is interesting that you mentioned this, right? So I was saying earlier that the signing process that we're engaging in at the moment does not involve digital signatures, which is not accurate. It does involve digital signatures. You're actually signing with your wallet's private keys over the hash in order to be able to spend it onto the blockchain, right? So you are signing over the hash. So in that case, in that sense, there is a digital signature involvement. The problem with digital signatures in general, though, is identity, right? It's not the fact that you have the signature, it's that you need to tie that signature back to an identity. And that is normally where the disconnect occurs. That's why we have certificate authorities that do KYC before they issue you a signing certificate that you can then use to sign stuff. And they, as the certificate authority, basically take on the role of this central third party who will authenticate the fact, and some of them now are recognized by governments, who will authenticate the identity behind a particular digital signature, right? But without that identity, you come back to the question of who signed this thing. Yeah, it's signed, but who has ownership over the signature, right? Who's the identity behind the signature? That is normally the sticky point with digital signatures.
My understanding of the identity is so that particular signed digital signature that happened on a file, that is also part of the identity of that individual. So so especially in blockchain, and when I listen to Craig, right, the identity is not going to be like an organization giving you say an ID, right? A driver's license that defining your identity. It's each and every data points within that blockchain where you participated or you have signed something is going to be considered as part of the identity. Isn't that so? Versus just one, like say ID.
You are right. You are right, but to the extent that, so identity is a very weird thing, right? Because without actually getting too, I kind of tend to get very philosophical about these things, but I want to try and avoid that because I want to stick to the practicality of it. I would say that there is a high degree of certainty that I can prove that I signed a hash with my Handcash wallet because I have a relationship with Handcash. Handcash has done some soft KYC with me, right? It's not the sort of KYC that is sort of full KYC that we would recognize in the courts, but it not only in the courts, sorry, that would be recognized for like things that have a high bar or a high threshold that you need to cross in order to assert identity, things like property ownership, for example, right? Legally binding contracts, right? Things like that. But if I want to be able to prove that, you know, there's a high degree, like if I want to provide evidence that there is a high degree of certainty that this wallet belongs to me, Handcash can proffer the fact that the mobile phone that they onboarded was this mobile phone, that is also the mobile phone that has basically been spending the transaction. And there's a relationship between these signatures and this mobile phone number that we onboarded, et cetera, right? And then the mobile phone number obviously ties back to me, right? I can still say that my assistant handles my Twitter account, so I didn't post the comment, but to the extent that I want to claim that the hashes are mine, it certainly adds weight to my claim. I wouldn't say that it, but that has nothing to do with identity per se, right? I feel like it's a tougher thing to do to try and assert me, Stefan, with my government issued identity that has these particular legal protections in this particular jurisdiction that I am, not can claim, right, but yeah, I don't know where I was going to go with that argument now.
Yeah, that can probably take another full episode. I think today we just focus on the Notarium.
Okay.
Yes.
Has anybody pondered upon the idea of using such a timestamping scheme for verifying system log entries?
Yeah, that's exactly what the API for it is meant to be done, to be for. But in order for the API to be done right, there needs to be an account-based system, right? Meaning that you need to basically create an account on the server, which you can then pre-fund with tokens or with Satoshis that would allow for the automated spending on your behalf as you're actually pinging the API, right? Otherwise, I would be pushing the responsibility for constructing the transaction over to you when you're trying to do that. But yes, I specifically thought about, there is a whole range of external automations, but those external automations essentially require that instead of the current completely pseudonymous way of transacting with the service, there needs to be an account-based SaaS application essentially that you manage your API through.
Yeah, I think there could be a huge market for that. I mean, heck, I might even implement, I have like a centralized logging aggregator that aggregates log across my servers, and it will be really great to implement such a thing in case someone might break into.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I bet enterprises would pay a lot for that. Yeah.
I don't know if they'll pay a lot, but they'll pay some.
Yeah.
Enterprise sales are hard.
That's what the Bitcoin Association is trying to do, right? Mostly.
Yeah, and I think that well, I don't know that I think that Bitcoin Association is probably trying to do enterprise evangelism, but so I don't actually know how they're working the funnel, right? It could be that Bitcoin Association does the evangelism, and then all of the companies that we've sort of started hearing about, the consultancies, are essentially the introductions that are getting made so that these guys get funneled into the long sales cycle for products and services, because enterprise sales can take a year or more sometimes. 6 months to a year is not uncommon for enterprise sales. Really big contracts up to 2 years. So it just might be that company, InChain, Vionex, all of these companies are getting introductions through the funnel of awareness that that the Bitcoin Association is generating, and those introductions will lead to long sales cycles that will culminate in projects 1 or 2 years down the road.
Okay, that's Samir's expertise. So we'll see.
What's your expertise, Samir?
No, he's Bitcoin
Honestly-
Association, right? No.
I don't know. I honestly don't know my expertise yet. I'm still discovering.
Okay.
Oh,
You're
are you
ambassador.
VA?
Yeah,
Oh, he's a VA
ambassador.
ambassador.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Let's say that for right now. Yeah. Honestly,
Yeah.
I'm discovering a lot about myself. Honestly, with Bitcoin, So I
We
honestly
are.
don't know.
We all are. So
Yeah.
that's good.
Yeah.
Okay. Any final questions, comments about Notarium?
Wow, did we manage to go 2 hours talking about BIP270? That's amazing.
Yeah, I know. I thought it would be like half an
Time
hour or
flies.
something. So, but I think for me, I'm really interested to have you talk about this, because for me, I always hear about on the theoretical side of things, right? The BIP270. Oh, this should how. It's really good to see the actual architecture, and also what's most valuable is the pains you have been going through, right? The lessons, because then other people watch this, they don't have to go through, right? So for example, oh, I don't ask my wallet to broadcast it. I have to find somebody, the miner API, I have to broadcast it. That's why. And I already tried different wallets, and this one works best. So I don't have to try 5 others. So hopefully whoever was watching this can find this super helpful, which I personally feel this very helpful. So thanks, Stefan. If you have more update later on, we can always talk about it.
Cool. Thank you for giving me some space to talk about it. I actually really enjoyed the talk. I love talking about BIP270.
Okay, yeah. Okay, guys, anything else? We can call it a day.
Yeah, I think we can draw a line.
I don't have anything. That was great.
Okay.
Thanks, Stefan.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Stefan.
Very great talk.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, thanks, Stefan.
All right.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
See you guys.
Have a
good
good
night.
weekend,
All
guys.
right. See you guys.
Okay, you guys.
too.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.